Deep in the Japanese countryside, 5-year-old Minato was helping his grandfather arrange a few things in their family home. Excited, he carried flower pots toward the household shrine, unaware that a girl was playing with a ball in the next room. Following his grandfather's instructions, he placed the flower pots beneath the shrine and set 2 packets of snacks beside them. After he and his grandfather prayed together, he heard the sound of the girl running somewhere behind him, but when he turned around, there was no one there. Minato turned his attention back to the altar and discovered, to his surprise, that the snacks had vanished. He accused his grandfather of eating everything too quickly, given that the old man had diabetes. Just then, he spun around and caught sight of the creepy, doll-like girl sprinting away. She turned briefly toward Minato, flashed a grateful smile, and disappeared into thin air. Terrified, Minato clung to his grandfather for safety. The old man, however, was overjoyed. His grandson could finally see spirits that ordinary people could not. He told Minato that the boy could only see good spirits for now, but that was more than enough. When Minato asked who the strange girl was, his grandfather explained that she was a house spirit who had lived in that dwelling for centuries. The old man advised him not to get angry if the mischievous spirit occasionally stole his snacks, but rather to share them with her willingly. He told Minato that he possessed a gift most people never even knew existed, and that one day it would surely serve him well. 15 years passed. Minato was now a young adult who had just landed his first job, caretaker of an abandoned house. He stepped off a bus in a quiet, distant village, surrounded by lush greenery and rice fields stretching as far as the eye could see. Following a hand-drawn map through the sleepy settlement, he eventually arrived at a lavish mansion radiating a deeply unsettling, evil aura. He thought he was simply seeing things, rubbed his eyes, and the aura dissolved from his sight. Unconcerned, he moved to unlock the gate. But the moment his hand-drawn map brushed against the lingering evil energy, his handwriting glowed and the aura dispersed entirely. Minato felt a faint electric jolt, which he dismissed as built-up static charge in the gate. What puzzled him more was that the writing on his map had suddenly faded. A gust of wind then snatched the paper from his hands and sent it sailing into the forest, where it struck a forgotten shrine beneath a great tree. The evil energy shrouding the shrine was instantly cleared, and the god who resided within it stirred and awakened from a long, deep slumber. Meanwhile, Minato explored the house and discovered it had quite a large garden, overgrown enough to require a professional's help. He got to work making memos and to-do lists, unpacking boxes, and chatting with his mother on the phone like a seasoned multitasker. He asked her whether he was truly the right person to look after a house so large. She explained that the property had been built as a retirement home by his father's distant uncle, who had died before he ever got to retire. The family was simply maintaining it in his memory. Minato suggested they sell the place, since it was prime real estate, but his mother told him that several prospective buyers had come and gone, each one refusing without offering any explanation. Minato threw himself into cleaning after the call. Unbeknownst to him, the evil energy from earlier had returned. It drifted toward the notes he had pinned to the refrigerator, but the moment it touched his handwriting, it was purified on the spot. Later, when Minato stepped out to inspect the garden again, he found a bundle of flowers that someone had left for him. Puzzled about who might have left him a welcome gift, he spotted a dog-like face peering out from the bushes before it vanished just as quickly as it had appeared. The following day, Minato called in a gardener who cleared the weeds and asked whether he would like some flowers planted in the beds. Minato declined, explaining that as a caretaker, he did not have the authority to make such decisions. The gardener looked a little deflated. At that moment, an evil aura wrapped itself around the man's shoulder, prompting him to complain that his shoulder had been aching for a week. As if on cue, a scrap of paper bearing Minato's handwriting drifted toward the gardener and purified the evil energy, relieving his pain instantly. Minato assumed the man must have some loose screws for behaving so theatrically in front of a stranger, but then he noticed his handwriting had faded again, and found a wild herb sitting on his porch. He asked the gardener if he had left it, but the man denied it. Minato began to wonder what, exactly, was going on in this house. The next morning, he found wild berries on the porch and glimpsed something leaping over his fence. This reminded him of the time the spirit girl had left a 4-leaf clover as thanks for the snacks he had shared, and suddenly everything clicked. He resolved to prepare gifts for the unknown spirit and went straight to the shops, picking up wine and sweets. He arranged them on the porch and wondered aloud whether the spirit would enjoy the selection. Right on cue, the spirit arrived. Drawn by the delicious aroma, it revealed its true form, that of a majestic white dog. The dog greeted Minato warmly, but Minato reacted with shock at being spoken to by an animal. The dog took immediate offense, declaring that he was no mere animal but Yamagami, god of the nearby mountain. Minato calmed down at once, reasoning that encountering a god was a perfectly plausible explanation, far more so than a talking dog. Yamagami was astonished by how unfazed Minato seemed, but his attention was quickly captured by the food arranged before him. Minato offered him wine as well, but Yamagami declined, explaining that his spirit doctor had forbidden alcohol while he was still recovering his strength. Minato poured him water instead. After drinking, Yamagami thanked Minato for everything he had unknowingly done. He explained that while Yamagami had been weakened, evil spirits had grown stronger and seized control of the entire village, even binding Yamagami himself. Minato's presence had purified the evil energy and set him free. When Minato pressed him for more detail, Yamagami told him plainly that his handwriting repelled evil. Everything suddenly made sense to Minato. Just then, the gardener returned to retrieve a forgotten tool. Minato panicked, wondering how he would explain the enormous divine wolf beside him, but it turned out that no one except Minato could see Yamagami. Noticing that Yamagami's bowl was empty, Minato poured him sparkling water in place of regular water. Yamagami flinched at the fizz, then quietly found himself enjoying what the bubbles did to his body. While Yamagami drank, Minato asked how his handwriting could possibly repel evil spirits. Yamagami asked whether anyone had ever complimented his handwriting, and Minato recalled a moment from years ago. He had carved a nameplate for his family's hot spring business as a school assignment, and one day a mysterious customer had told him that his handwriting was deeply special. The stranger had urged him never to remove the nameplate and had even asked him to make more, for the house and for himself. Yamagami concluded that the mysterious man must have possessed the ability to perceive spiritual energy. Minato added that the encouragement had meant so much to him that crafting nameplates had since become his hobby, and he had already made several for this house. Yamagami immediately instructed him to place them on both the front and rear doors without delay. The moment Minato did so, a powerful barrier formed around the entire house. Minato staggered back in amazement, and Yamagami explained that the barrier would prevent any evil energy from approaching the property. A few days later, Yamagami visited Minato again to share some snacks. While eating, he began to glow, and Minato wondered aloud whether he was about to evolve like a Pokemon. Yamagami explained that his power was returning because Minato fed him and treated him with respect. Minato, ever eager, decided to show even more reverence than usual in hopes of making him glow brighter, but soon found he could not handle the intensity of all that divine radiance and asked Yamagami to tone it down. Elsewhere in the village at that same moment, a team of exorcists was battling evil spirits inside an abandoned warehouse. Their leader managed to dispel most of them, but one escaped and fled toward the main village. He gave chase, worried it would attack Minato, who stood directly in its path. To his amazement, the spirit vanished the instant it made contact with Minato. The exorcist asked whether he was all right. Minato, on the verge of tears, replied that his shopping list had faded and he had no idea what had been on it. Unable to explain the full situation just yet, the exorcist helped him reconstruct the list by playing a round of dumb charades with him, while the purified spirit rolled away as a glowing silver ball. Back at Minato's home, Yamagami was alone, and the empty, barren garden personally offended him. Taking it upon himself to rectify the situation, he used his power to renovate it entirely. The next morning, Minato woke to find lush green grass and full, gleaming ponds where there had previously been nothing. Moved by the transformation, he thanked Yamagami wholeheartedly, only to notice that the mountain god had shrunk considerably in size. Yamagami explained that the exertion had diminished him, but assured Minato he would return to full size before long. Several days passed, however, and Yamagami failed to appear. When he finally turned up again, he had shrunk even further. Minato was taken aback and asked how much power he had expended to reduce himself to puppy size once more. At that moment, 3 small squirrel-beaver hybrid creatures came bounding after Yamagami. Minato jumped to the wild conclusion that Yamagami had been up to something with a spirit wife and these were their offspring, but Yamagami quickly clarified that he had used his power to create minions to serve him. The 3 minions introduced themselves as Siri, Tori, and Atsu. Minato immediately treated them to dessert to mark the occasion, and they ate so enthusiastically that they pronounced him the greatest friend in the world before falling asleep on the porch. By the time they woke, Yamagami had recovered his power and returned to his full size. Sensing that Minato had a visitor, Yamagami looked toward the gate to find the same exorcist from before, sweating visibly at the sheer weight of holy energy surrounding the mansion. Minato welcomed him inside and learned that his name was Harama, a professional exorcist. Minato confessed that he found it hard to believe such people really existed, but Harama told him plainly that he possessed greater power than anyone Harama had ever encountered. He reminded Minato of the time he had unknowingly purified an evil spirit in the marketplace, then explained that evil spirits had been increasing in number and the exorcist community did not have enough manpower to handle them all. For that reason, he had come to purchase Minato's talismans. Minato was puzzled, as he did not consider himself to have any such thing. Yamagami quietly told him that what Harama wanted were simply pieces of paper bearing his handwriting, and noted that the exorcist lacked sufficient spiritual power to perceive Yamagami himself. Minato informed Harama that the only thing he had to offer was his shopping list, which left the exorcist momentarily speechless. He could hardly believe that such an ordinary object was capable of repelling evil spirits, but it was all Minato had, so he set about making some talismans on the spot, filling the pages with the names of his favorite adult actresses. Harama choked on his tea, having expected some ancient incantation or mysterious spell. Nevertheless, when he observed that the handwriting pulsed with an extraordinary amount of spiritual energy, he accepted the papers gratefully and offered a thick bundle of cash as payment. Minato refused, insisting that he had merely scribbled random words on paper. Harama pressed him to accept the money as an advance, and when Yamagami advised Minato to take it, he stopped resisting. Still feeling as though he were taking advantage, Minato drew a pentagram on Harama's hand for extra good luck. Just then, Harama received an urgent call from his agency and rushed off. His teammates warned him that even he could not handle the spirit they were now facing alone, and Harama found himself in real danger as it attacked. At the critical moment, however, the pentagram on his hand flared to life and the evil spirit was instantly destroyed. A few days later, Minato sat reviewing his income and expenses and found himself completely broke. He stared at the ceiling, wondering what to do, and thought ruefully about how quickly the money from Harama had been spent. The culprits were his guests and their seemingly insatiable appetite for premium snacks. He watched the 3 minions devour cream-filled buns while they thanked him, and they remarked that such delicious treats must have cost a fortune. Minato told them not to worry about it and assured them he wanted only the best for his guests, all while quietly suffering in silence. Meanwhile, Yamagami helped himself to traditional Japanese sweets from a 200-year-old confectionery, which were, naturally, not cheap. Unable to tell his divine guests that their gluttony was draining him dry, and unwilling to buy anything low quality after witnessing their sulking at subpar goods, Minato was stuck. While Yamagami savored his sweets, he suddenly noticed a mysterious creature in the garden pond. The next day, Minato went to the market for groceries and paused in front of a cafe advertising for part-time workers. He briefly considered taking a second job to fund everyone's snack habits, then quickly realized it would never be enough. Spotting a raffle nearby, he bought a single ticket on impulse and won first prize on his very first roll. The prize was 100,000 yen, and the crowd around him erupted in disbelief. Minato took this as a sign and decided to put the winnings toward some high-quality wine for Yamagami. He made his way to a traditional liquor store, planning to buy something truly exceptional. The moment he stepped inside, staff showered him in confetti, as that day marked the store's 333rd year in business, and he happened to be their 333rd customer of the day. They congratulated him on winning a special wine set, and Minato stood there blinking, unsure of what was happening. By the time he arrived home, his arms were full of prizes won through sheer luck. He asked Yamagami whether this was the result of his divine power, reasoning that one would have to be a god's favorite to experience luck like this. Yamagami replied that it was not his doing, and directed Minato's attention to a tortoise standing atop a boulder in the garden pond, a tortoise carrying a miniature island on its back. He told Minato that this was Riki, one of the 4 holy beasts that brought good fortune, and that Riki had come to thank him. Minato was baffled. He had no memory of ever helping a tortoise. Yamagami reminded him that when he had accidentally purified an evil spirit in the marketplace, he had also freed Riki, who had been trapped by that same spirit. He explained that Minato's recent streak of extraordinary luck was entirely Riki's doing, but Minato still could not quite believe it, until his phone rang. It was his mother, in a state of panic, telling him he had won 1 million yen from a lottery he had entered before moving away. That settled it. Minato dropped to his knees in gratitude to the lucky god. Yamagami mentioned that Riki wished to stay in the pond. Minato asked whether Yamagami was comfortable sharing the space, and Yamagami reminded him that it was Minato's garden, the decision was entirely his. Minato had no objection whatsoever and welcomed Riki with the special wine he had just won. The tortoise moved with startling speed at the sight of the bottle and was beside Minato in an instant. After savoring the drink, Riki presented Minato with a set of special seeds as thanks. Minato planted them in the garden as Yamagami cautioned him that the plants would grow very tall, so he should choose an open area. Once the seeds were in the ground, Minato asked what kind of plant they were, a question he probably should have asked before planting them. Yamagami declined to answer, telling him he would find out soon enough. The following day, as Minato was bringing out snacks for Yamagami, he heard an unfamiliar voice asking whether they might have some too. He looked up and found a purple gnome and a red gnome hanging upside down from his door frame. Minato startled, but Yamagami told him to relax, they were old friends. He introduced them as Ryan, god of thunder, and Fujin, god of wind, both well-known figures from Japanese folklore. Minato looked at the 2 small, impish creatures in front of him and asked with genuine surprise whether these were really the legendary gods. Yamagami confirmed it. Minato welcomed them in and offered cookies, which immediately caused Yamagami's minions to arrive in a huff, insisting those cookies had been set aside for them. Ryan and Fujin told the minions to calm down, reminding them they were their father's guests. Yamagami asked what had brought them here, and they replied that they had heard the place was very comfortable and wanted to see for themselves. They were not disappointed. When they spotted Riki drinking, Minato offered them a drink as well. The 2 gods accepted without hesitation, and after several bottles were emptied, they were thoroughly satisfied. Fujin decided to express his gratitude for the snacks and drinks by granting Minato the use of his power. He snapped his fingers and a powerful breeze immediately began swirling around Minato, who stumbled backward in surprise. Fujin explained that Minato could now channel the power of wind. He instructed him to try it out, and one of Yamagami's minions held up a leaf as a target while the senior gods told him to focus and imagine himself generating wind. Minato did as he was told and, before long, produced a gentle breeze strong enough to move the leaf. He was thrilled about acquiring what amounted to a superpower, though his immediate plan to use it for sweeping dried leaves from the garden prompted a mixed reaction from the assembled gods. Across the village, Harama had, thanks to Minato's pentagram, effectively become the most formidable exorcist in the region. He had not washed that hand in days to preserve the power, though the markings were now beginning to fade. He was still marveling at Minato's abilities when he heard the shout of a fellow exorcist. He sprinted toward the commotion and found a blonde exorcist named Akijo pinned against a wall by a ferocious ghost, while Akijo's partner stood frozen, too frightened to act. The ghost lunged, and Akijo braced himself for a curse he was certain would kill him, but Harama arrived at the last moment and dispatched the spirit using one of Minato's talismans. Akijo took notice. After the mission, he ordered his partner to tell him everything she knew about Harama's shopping memos, which had seemingly elevated him overnight to the best exorcist in the region. She told him only that Harama had received them from someone recently. Akijo grabbed her collar and called her useless. She saw an opening and asked, pointedly, whether he was simply jealous that Harama was clearly better than him. This enraged him, and she used the distraction to flee. Left alone, Akijo swore that he would never lose to Harama, no matter what. Back at Minato's house, a brief rain shower came and went, leaving the garden completely unaffected. Yamagami explained matter-of-factly that this was to be expected, since the garden was now sacred ground and ordinary natural phenomena would not disturb it. Minato was impressed, and his gaze drifted to Riki, who was staring intently at a small sapling in the soil, the very spot where he had planted the seed just the day before. He was curious about what the plant would become. Yamagami told him it was the camphor tree, known in Japanese as the kusaninoki, which happened to be Minato's own family name. He explained that it was a sacred tree on sacred ground, though he left out the finer details. Minato, unaware of any of this deeper significance, concluded simply that trees needed water and nutrients, and immediately fetched a watering can, despite the fact that it had just rained. The next day, supplies arrived from Minato's mother, and among them was a hiking jacket. Yamagami asked whether he was planning to go hiking. Minato replied that he wanted to climb Yamagami's mountain and pay his respects at the shrine there. Yamagami warned him that the climb would not be easy, but Minato had already prepared his gear. Yamagami was nostalgic. People used to make regular pilgrimages to his shrine, but no one had done so in a very long time. He told Minato that his minions would serve as guides. The following day, Minato set out to climb the mountain. It was as difficult as advertised. Led by the minions across rivers and through caves, he eventually reached a small wooden shrine. He began cleaning it at once, and the minions helped him, remarking that Yamagami would be very pleased. Once they finished, they sat together and shared snacks, until a blood-curdling scream tore through the air. The minions flew toward the source, and Minato followed. They came face to face with a dark mist that swelled into the shape of a powerful evil spirit. It attacked one of the minions, who tumbled into the safety of Minato's arms. Minato stared at the spirit in shock, and the minions informed him that the entire surrounding region was saturated with evil energy. He replied that, being an optimist, he generally only perceived good things, so if he could see this spirit, it must be truly formidable. The minions exchanged a weary look and asked, with some urgency, whether he had his notepad. He did. Minato wrote quickly, then cautiously approached the spirit, but found himself too terrified to confront it head-on. In a flash of inspiration, he tore pages from the notepad and threw them into the air, then used Fujin's wind power to send them surging toward the spirit. A single page was enough to purify it and free the divine being it had been possessing. A golden orb fell to the ground and took the form of a peculiar creature that Minato could not quite identify. He reached out to ask whether it was all right, but the creature shied away and vanished up a waterfall in an instant. Minato returned home feeling glad to have helped. The next day, Yamagami thanked Minato for cleaning his shrine, and Minato brushed it off as nothing. He then asked about the spirit he had freed in the forest. Yamagami told him he would find out soon enough. Minato turned his attention to the camphor tree, which had stopped growing despite its impressive initial burst. The minions assured him that sacred trees followed their own patterns of growth, entirely different from ordinary ones, and told him not to worry. Just then, Riki approached with something to say. Since Minato could not understand tortoise, he turned to Yamagami for translation and was told he had a visitor at the gate. He went outside and found a dragon waiting politely at his front gate. After a brief, startled pause, Minato let him in and learned that he was Oryu, one of the 4 holy beasts, like Riki. No sooner had the introductions been made than Oryu flew directly to the camphor tree and let out a tremendous roar, summoning clouds across an otherwise clear sky. It began to rain, and within seconds the young sapling had grown into a full, magnificent tree. Minato stood in awe. Oryu then asked whether he might share the pond with Riki. Since Riki had no objection to a companion, Minato agreed and welcomed the dragon with a bottle of imported wine. As they settled in to enjoy themselves, Yamagami mentioned that it had actually been Harama who freed Oryu, using the power of Minato's pentagram, which was why the dragon had come to offer his thanks. Minato had barely processed this when his doorbell rang. It was Harama, arriving for another batch of talismans, as he always brought luxury sweets on his visits. Minato handed over fresh shopping memos and thanked him. He asked whether the pentagram had been useful, and Harama confirmed it had been exceptional, though this time he needed something different, as another family had apparently trademarked the pentagram design. Minato drew a grid on his hand instead. Harama left to report back to his organization, sharing everything with the one teammate he fully trusted, who acknowledged that Minato's abilities were extraordinary and that the secret needed to be kept strictly to protect a civilian. Neither of them knew that Akijo had already made his move, following Minato in the market and quietly sticking a tracking talisman on his back. A few days later, Minato was focused on his writing, which had become his primary source of income. He experimented with different pens and found that brush-style pens felt the most natural in his hand. Yamagami watched him from a distance, keeping a quiet, watchful eye both on Minato and on a paper doll that was floating just outside the property, unable to cross onto the sacred grounds. Minato was entirely unaware of it. Only a couple of days earlier, Harama had paid him a visit to warn him about potential dangers. He had asked Minato whether anything unusual had been happening, such as an arrogant stranger coming around. Minato replied that nothing of the sort had occurred. Harama then told him about Akijo, a colleague who had always harbored jealousy toward him and had grown even more aggressive since learning about the new talismans. Harama warned Minato that Akijo used paper dolls to spy on people. Minato seemed to have since forgotten all of this. Fortunately, Yamagami had not. He used his power to destroy Akijo's paper doll, preventing any information from reaching him. Later that day, Minato was writing shopping lists while Yamagami flipped through magazines beside him. Yamagami was outraged to read that a beloved sweet shop was planning to switch from smooth red bean paste to chunky, and declared that such a decision bordered on criminal. Minato mentioned that he frequented that very shop and decided to take Yamagami along on his next visit. He felt slightly self-conscious about the idea of walking through town with a divine wolf, but Yamagami reminded him to relax, only the rarest of humans could perceive him. This proved mostly true, though a schoolgirl gave him a curious look and a religious grandmother immediately began praying the moment she sensed Yamagami's presence. This led Minato to surmise that those with genuinely pure hearts could feel Yamagami, even if they could not see him. Struck by inspiration, Minato dated to a pottery shop before visiting the sweet shop and bought an antique cup for Yamagami, reasoning that it was a genuine insult to serve a god from a dog's bowl. He then said they should buy a pillow, and though Yamagami insisted he was far too distinguished to have any interest in soft things, he immediately turned into a delighted puppy the moment he felt one. Unfortunately, none were available in his size, so Minato arranged to have one custom-made. They made their way at last to the sweet shop, where Minato noticed that the elderly proprietor looked remarkably well, healthier and brighter-eyed than usual. Yamagami urged him to tell the shopkeeper to keep using smooth bean paste, but Minato could not think of a natural way to raise the subject. The shopkeeper broke the silence with small talk and asked whether Minato had recently been up the mountain. When Minato said he had, the shopkeeper leaned in and asked in a low voice whether he had seen the holy dog. Yamagami took immediate offense at being referred to as a dog. He was a wolf, but stayed quiet. Minato said he had not. The old man, undeterred, shared a childhood memory. When he was very young, he had gotten lost in the mountains. He found a shrine up there, glowing softly with floating lights, and a giant white dog had suddenly bounded in front of him. Terrified, he had run, but the creature kept following him, barking and steering him away from wrong turns, until he found himself safely back on the road. The shopkeeper said that the holy dog had guided him home, and that ever since, he had made occasional trips up the mountain to leave snacks at the shrine. He theorized that the creature had been the spirit of a former guide dog, a claim that silently wounded Yamagami's pride considerably, though he kept his reaction to himself. On the way home, Minato remarked that the old man had looked very well. Yamagami replied quietly that the man suffered from medical issues that were steadily diminishing his life, and that even a god could not cure him. What he had done, however, was use his power to ensure the man remained as healthy and happy as possible for as long as he had left, so he could live a little longer and pass the shop on to a worthy successor. Once they returned home, Minato hung a wind bell at Yamagami's request and then went to take a bath. Shortly after, Akijo arrived at the gate with his partner, Hai, in tow. Hai asked what he planned to do when he met Minato, and Akijo replied arrogantly that he would either buy all the talismans outright or convince Minato to produce talismans exclusively for him. Hai found this surprisingly restrained given her partner's usual temperament. She looked at the house and noticed something peculiar, lights flickering above the rooftop and the faint sound of a bell, and sensed that there was something distinctly unusual about the place. Meanwhile, Akijo rang the doorbell. When no one answered immediately, he lost patience and began pounding on the door, shouting at Minato to come out. In his rage, he attempted to kick the gate open. Hai started forward to stop him, knowing it was dangerous, but, much as she wanted to intervene, she froze and simply covered her eyes. Before Akijo's foot could even connect with the gate, he was transported to a dark, eerie forest where everything was saturated in deep red. A shrine stood before him. He looked around frantically, unable to find Hai, and the oppressive atmosphere of the red forest quickly unraveled his composure. He tried to run, but a tree root rose from the ground by itself and tripped him. He fell, struck his head on a rock, and slowly lost consciousness. When he came to, he was standing in front of the shrine again, and his watch showed that not a single second had passed. He looked around in dawning horror, realizing he was thoroughly and completely trapped. His first instinct was to blame Harama for everything. He kicked the shrine and ran, but no matter what direction he chose, the only thing he found was another terrible fate, each death more awful than the last, each time waking up before the shrine once more. Eventually, he gave up. He fell to his knees and apologized sincerely and desperately to whoever resided in the shrine, begging for mercy and asking only to be sent back home. At that moment, he heard the clear chime of a bell, and suddenly he was back in front of Minato's house, sprawled on the ground as the scenery shifted around him. He asked Hai in a trembling voice how many days had passed while he was gone. She told him he had not gone anywhere, they had just arrived. This terrified him even more than the nightmare forest had. He scrambled to his feet and fled, screaming, with no apparent intention of returning. Shortly after, Minato emerged from the shower and asked Yamagami whether someone had been at the door. Yamagami said there had been no one. Minato decided to relax and enjoy the rest of the evening. Soaking in a long, hot bath, he found himself lamenting that he missed the hot springs from his childhood home. The comment gave Yamagami an idea. The next morning, Minato woke to the smell of sulfur drifting in through the windows. He stepped outside to find Yamagami lounging contentedly in a brand new hot spring in the garden, beckoning Minato to join him. Minato needed no convincing. As they soaked in the steaming water, Yamagami explained that he had worked overnight with Riki and Oryu to create the spring, and the two of them were likely quite exhausted from the effort. After the bath, Minato was resting on the floor when one of the minions ran in to tell him there was a strange visitor. Oryu added that the visitor was a friend of his. Minato went to the gate and found no one immediately visible, then noticed the timid creature he had freed in the mountains. The creature retreated the moment their eyes met, and one of the minions went to speak with it on Minato's behalf. The minion relayed the creature's message, it wanted permission to enter the house. Minato extended the welcome. The creature, whose name was Kiran, began speaking with Minato, with one of the minions serving as interpreter. Kiran expressed deep gratitude for being saved in the mountains, then talked for what felt like hours. At the end of it all, he announced that as a reward for saving his life, he intended to make Minato the king of half the world. Minato was horrified and explained emphatically that he had no desire to rule anything. Kiran was genuinely shocked, he had assumed all humans wanted more power. Rarin and Fujin, who had arrived by this point, stepped in to assure Kiran that Minato was simply not like other people. Minato thanked them all for their support and invited the assembled gods to use his newly created hot spring. He also noticed that Rarin and Fujin seemed bigger than before. They explained that his acknowledgement and genuine respect for them was helping them recover their true forms. Fujin, in a celebratory mood, produced an enormous tuna from his bag, sliced it into fine pieces with his wind powers, and Rarin collected the portions. The minions were deeply impressed and asked Minato whether he could do the same one day. He hesitated, then said he was sure he would manage eventually. Fujin decided to assess where Minato's abilities currently stood. He began by having him channel his wind power to ruffle Yamagami's fur as a precision test. Minato quickly lost control, and Yamagami sneezed, though he told Minato to keep going, since it amounted to a rather pleasant fur massage. Fujin observed that Minato appeared to be holding back, afraid of hurting people. Just then, a message arrived from Minato's mother. All the nameplates at the family home had broken and needed to be replaced urgently. Minato set to work at once and, while carving, asked Yamagami whether it was odd that the nameplates at his family home kept breaking so regularly. Yamagami asked whether a non-human being lived in the house, and Minato recalled the doll spirit from his childhood. Yamagami suggested that the spirit was probably breaking the nameplates to signal that their protective energy had been spent, her own way of telling him it was time for a renewal. Minato agreed that this made sense. He asked whether Yamagami could help him create something stronger than usual. Yamagami affirmed, but told him that to do that, Minato would first need to sharpen his wind abilities. He led Minato through the rear door of the house, which glowed brilliantly when opened, and through it they entered a sacred training ground that the minions had created. It was forest-like but entirely artificial. Minato was hesitant about damaging the trees, but Yamagami assured him they were as unreal as certain people he knew, and Minato relaxed into the session. In the meantime, Kirin paid another visit and, finding Minato absent, decided to leave a gift, a durian fruit, which filled the garden with one of the most notorious smells in the natural world. He set it down and turned to leave, only to find Riki and Oreo emerging from the pond and kicking it away. Kirin caught it and demanded to know what they thought they were doing. The two holy beasts told him firmly that he should not bring foul-smelling offerings to a sacred place while the owner was away. Kirin insisted it was a perfectly respectable fruit and that its removal was entirely unjustified. In the training forest, Minato released his wind power at full strength, generating gusts powerful enough to shake even the artificial trees. He could not sustain it for long and collapsed. Yamagami carried him back to the house. Once he recovered, Minato resolved to train harder and did exactly that, practicing in the fake forest daily while also carving new nameplates. Yamagami could feel the increased spiritual energy flowing into them with each session. A few days later, Minato's control had improved noticeably. He was now able to produce a focus mini tornado that collected dried leaves from across the garden and deposited them neatly in a single pile. He was quietly pleased that the ability was finally serving a practical purpose in his daily life. Even Yamagami acknowledged his progress. Minato remained humble, saying he was still nowhere near Fujin's level. Fujin himself appeared at that moment and told him not to underestimate himself. He declared that with continued training, Minato would eventually become strong enough to split an enemy's house clean in two. Minato replied, with some alarm, that he believed firmly in non-violence. Rarin suggested he at least try zapping someone unconscious once before ruling it out entirely, but Minato maintained there was no need. He then noticed that Yamagami's minions were nowhere to be seen and asked about them. Yamagami explained that they were training as well, motivated by how helpless they had felt against the evil spirit in the mountains. They were currently meditating in the training forest. Minato was glad to hear it and hoped they were putting in the effort. As it turned out, their meditation session had already devolved into a group nap. Afterward, Minato roasted sweet potatoes in the pile of dried leaves, and Yamagami and Oreo enjoyed them enormously. Riki opted for alcohol over food, while Rarin and Fujin declared they could make far better roasted sweet potatoes than Minato. He invited them to demonstrate. Fujin lifted the sweet potatoes into the air, and Rarin struck them with a bolt of lightning, which promptly incinerated them rather than roasting them. Minato sighed. Just then, he felt something land at his feet. He looked down to find several exotic fruits on the ground and spotted Kirin lurking in the bushes. He welcomed him back and thanked him for always bringing interesting things from his travels, then offered him some of the charred sweet potatoes as a friendly gesture. Kirin, however, was convinced that humans had a habit of burning things, and possibly creatures, and feared he might be next on Minato's agenda. He remained hidden behind the bushes. Minato wondered quietly when the holy beast would ever warm up to him. Yamagami told him to fetch some beer, since that was what Kirin was partial to. Minato made a note of it. The doorbell rang. Harama stood on the step looking utterly exhausted and immediately collapsed against Minato's shoulder. Minato brought him inside, gave him water, and asked what was wrong. Harama apologized for worrying him, then remarked that he was feeling an unusually heavy spiritual pressure today. Minato was unable to explain that this was due to the gathering of several gods in the next room. Harama got to the point. He said he needed Minato's help to exorcise a particularly powerful and evil spirit, one that the combined efforts of his entire association had failed to subdue. He explained that weeks earlier, a cursed doll had been brought to a temple for exorcism. The attempt had failed, the spirit had grown stronger, and it had since overtaken the entire temple. The evil aura was now so thick that no exorcist could get close. The situation was made worse by the fact that the corrupted temple now existed within a separate dimension, entirely inaccessible by normal means. He added, carefully, that he knew Minato was no ordinary person. He could see that this was a sacred place. And he knew that Minato could see and speak with gods and divine spirits. This revelation was not welcome news to Yamagami, who interpreted it as Harama trying to exploit Minato's abilities for his own ends. He let out a thunderous roar, and Harama involuntarily wet himself, even though he could not see the source of the sound. The minions eventually calmed Yamagami down. Minato, for his part, decided it was time to stop hiding the truth. He asked Yamagami whether they could enter the other dimension with his help. Yamagami confirmed he was willing to help, but on one condition: exceptional traditional sweets. Harama procured the finest he could find, and the quality was sufficient to win Yamagami over completely. Yamagami told Minato to prepare himself to enter another dimension, but made clear that he would not be accompanying him. Instead, his minions would guide Minato and demonstrate the results of their training. The minions were eager for the opportunity. Minato prepared a set of talismans and left the house. As he did, a single leaf from the camphor tree became caught unnoticed in his hoodie. He and the minions made their way to the city to meet the exorcists and locate the entrance to the other dimension. The minions got distracted by the smell of fresh apple pies along the way, and Minato stopped to treat them. While they ate, a group of crows assembled before them and began calling out. Minato immediately recognized them as guides and followed them to an abandoned area where the corrupted temple stood. The evil aura surrounding it was so thick that even Minato could see it without any effort. The minions told him to proceed carefully. He called Harama to let him know he had arrived at the front gate, and Harama confirmed he was at the rear with the other exorcists. Harama's partner threw powerful talismans at the aura as a test. They vanished without leaving a mark. Harama told Minato not to push himself and that if his life felt threatened, he should run immediately, since this was not his responsibility. Minato replied that he would do his best. He tried to push the door open and received a powerful shock that sent him stumbling backward. The minions rallied and channeled their divine energy together to force the door open, and Minato stepped through into a dimension thick with malice. Inside, he found a deeply unsettling temple, and the minions confirmed that the source of all corruption lay within. Waves of evil spirits immediately descended on him. Minato pulled out a talisman just in time and blew them away. As the spirits dissolved, the dolls they had been possessing fell lifelessly to the ground. The minions, unwilling to let Minato handle everything alone, threw themselves into the next wave. In the chaos, one minion got overly excited and ignored warnings to stay alert. A briefly possessed doll turned on him and attacked, but his companions tore away the doll's bindings just in time and freed him. Minato was relieved that none of them had been seriously hurt. Then the source of all the corruption revealed itself, the boss of the evil spirits, emerging from the heart of the temple. Everyone felt the weight of its power immediately. It launched itself skyward with a terrible scream. Minato decided to end things quickly. He threw a fistful of memo papers into the air and drove them toward the spirit with a blast of wind, but the spirit was alert to the danger and used its long, writhing hair to shred the talismans and knock the minions aside. Minato was horrified. Then, before he could react, the spirit seized him and wrapped its hair around him in a tightening cage. As the pressure grew, Minato feared he was going to be crushed. In his desperation, he called out to Yamagami, and Yamagami heard him, even across the divide between dimensions. The minion surged toward Minato, urged him to hold on, and channeled Yamagami's power directly through their bodies. His mighty howl struck the evil spirit with tremendous force, immobilizing it. Minato was free. He moved without hesitation and wrote directly on the cursed doll. The evil spirit inside it was expelled instantly. He exhaled in relief, but the minions immediately told him it was not over. There was still a dense concentration of evil energy inside the temple. He found an orb at its center, entangled in dark energy. The minions explained that it was a mountain god who had been corrupted by evil forces and was suffering greatly. If they could exorcise it, the problem would be completely resolved. Minato reached into his pockets. No talismans. He reached for his notepad and began writing, a dozen of them, but the ink faded from the paper without producing any effect. The temple began to tremble as the alternate dimension began to collapse around them. One of the minions stumbled and, clutching at Minato for balance, slipped a hand into his hoodie pocket. There, he found the camphor leaf. He told Minato with great excitement that they could use it. Minato understood immediately, if even a leaf of the sacred camphor tree carried that level of power, it might be enough. He began writing on it, despite having nearly exhausted his spiritual energy, and inscribed his family name. It was enough. The evil energy possessing the mountain god was dispelled, and a freed divine orb remained. Minato picked it up and tucked it into his bag. Then the dimension began to collapse in earnest. The minions cried out that they would vanish if they could not escape in time. The world fractured around them, and then, suddenly, a tree fell across their path, and a moment later was split clean in half, along with a section of the crumbling temple wall. Minato fell through a crack in the ground. He woke to find himself outside, back on solid earth, in front of the ruins of the corrupted temple, with no clear memory of how he had gotten there. Ryan and Fujin appeared beside him, grinning. They informed him that if he had been just a little stronger, he could have done that himself, because what they had just done was precisely what they had described earlier, splitting the house of one's enemy in two. The following day, Harama arrived to thank Minato personally and brought a bag full of sweets. Minato invited him to join them for a barbecue, but Harama declined, explaining that he had developed something like post-traumatic stress from his last encounter with Yamagami's invisible fury. Minato went inside, where everyone was gathered and the barbecue was well underway, though Yamagami had quietly abandoned the meat in favor of sweets. When Minato mentioned that Harama had brought an additional bag of confections, the entire gathering immediately lost interest in the barbecue. Riki and Oryu were busy drinking. Ryan and Fujin were soaking in the hot spring. Minato brought cold beverages out for them to enjoy alongside the heat of the water. Kieran watched from a cautious distance, as was his habit, until Minato produced a can of beer and held it up in his direction. No creature with any self-respect could say no to beer. Kieran rolled a durian fruit toward Minato as a reciprocal offering, and Minato picked it up out of curiosity. Riki appeared at that exact moment and kicked it away with considerable force. Kieran was wounded by this. Riki stated firmly, again, that such a fruit had no place in sacred grounds. Kieran shouted that it was durian, a perfectly respectable fruit, and kicked it back. Riki kicked it again. Then Ori punched it and immediately complained that his hands were going to smell terrible for days. Minato laughed. He turned his attention to the camphor tree and watched as a few of its leaves drifted down in the breeze. He thanked the tree quietly for its help in that desperate moment. Just then, the minions called him over. The orb he had recovered from the corrupted temple was glowing. As they watched, it transformed, slowly, magnificently, into a tiny baby bird. Yamagami told him quietly that this was the last of the four holy beasts, the phoenix. Minato welcomed it with warmth, and the phoenix, for its part, seemed genuinely happy to be there. A few days later, Minato brought out some fusion desserts for Yamagami, a combination of strawberry and red bean paste that seemed to awaken something previously dormant in the mountain god, as he spontaneously began speaking English after eating one. Minato was privately grateful to whoever had invented that particular dessert combination. His attention shifted to the phoenix, who had somehow already established himself as the undisputed king of the local birds. Minato asked Yamagami to translate what was being said, and Yamagami explained that the phoenix was giving the birds detailed lessons on proper chirping technique, pitch, voice throw, projection, the works. It was extraordinary. Several of the birds managed to reproduce what he demonstrated with reasonable accuracy. The last one failed spectacularly and seemed to give the phoenix a visible twitch. Minato, who could not understand a word of bird, simply enjoyed the peaceful spring morning in his garden, surrounded by gods of varying sizes going about their business, entirely unaware of a tear in space and time forming quietly above the town. Elsewhere, Harama was having a far less peaceful spring. The season brought with it a surge of minor evil spirits that kept him and his partner perpetually busy, dispatching one only to receive a call about the next. The work showed no sign of letting up. The following day, Minato went out shopping and, on his way home, attracted an enormous and conspicuous escort of birds of every variety. Passers-by stared and began calling him the bird whisperer, and at least one person referred to him as Pigeon Boy. Minato made his exit from the area at considerable speed and told the phoenix, again, that this happened every single time they went out together. The phoenix confirmed this with what appeared to be a degree of satisfaction. On the way home, Minato ran into the local gardener, who had carved the garden hedge of a nearby property into a row of oddly unsettling mascot faces. The gardener explained that the owner had told him to let his creativity shine. He also mentioned that ever since he had worked on Minato's garden, everything had been going remarkably well: his work, his energy, his health. As they spoke, a flock of pigeons descended on the mascot statues, and Minato made a swift departure before the birds could undo the gardener's efforts. Back at home, Yamagami sensed something was wrong. His minions arrived urgently to report that a number of abandoned divine realms were opening up throughout the mountains, and Minato was still out. Yamagami told them not to worry while he was there, then took flight toward the disturbances, his minions following close behind. Minato was still on his way home when he noticed that all the birds around him had vanished without a trace. He was puzzling over this when Ryan and Fujin suddenly materialized before him and told him to get home as quickly as possible. They explained that today was a surge of abandoned divine realm portals, occasions when the sacred grounds of neglected gods opened up and spilled into the mortal world. As if on cue, a portal tore open in the sky above them, and Ryan sealed it with a bolt of lightning. They explained that portals could appear anywhere without warning, and that humans were sometimes accidentally pulled inside. The birds, Minato realized, had likely been swallowed by one. The gods told him not to look so unconcerned, because he was in more danger than anyone else. His affinity with divine elements was unusually high, and if he entered a divine realm, he would not be able to find his way out alone. Minato thanked them and promised to be careful. The twin gods told him that Yamagami was already working on sealing the portals and departed. Uneasy now, Minato decided to take a shortcut home rather than his usual route. Along the way, he passed an old and neglected shrine that immediately caught his eye. Two invisible spirits whispered urgently in his ears, warning him to keep walking. Minato, as luck would have it, heard not a word of it. He stood staring at the shrine with mild curiosity until the gate swung open and a portal began pulling him toward it. He could not resist the pull. The phoenix, sensing danger, leapt from his bag and took on its full divine form in a blaze of light, a magnificent display that lasted approximately 2 seconds before it exhausted all its energy and reverted to its chick form, which was then pulled into the portal along with Minato. They woke up in a forest where moss blanketed the ground completely. The air was heavy and difficult to breathe. Minato began searching for an exit, then noticed a series of wooden boxes arranged across the ground. He recalled Yamagami once saying that a sacred ground reflected the soul of its creator, the place that brought them the most comfort. Whoever had made this place, he thought, must be very fond of boxes. A large cave loomed ahead. He entered and found the air even denser and more stifling inside. He pushed deeper and eventually found a woman sleeping on the floor of the cave. After a moment of panic, he reasoned that she was probably the deity who had created this realm. She stirred and immediately began complaining about the poor ventilation, before deciding she was too tired to do anything about it. Minato introduced himself and asked whether she was the god who had built this place. She confirmed that she was, then asked what a human was doing there, and then noticed the phoenix peeking out from his bag, which confused her further. She asked again whether he was lost, since she had not summoned him. He explained that abandoned divine realm portals had been appearing on Earth. She took offense at the word abandoned, insisting her home was not abandoned. Then she paused, acknowledged that her power must have become weakened, and Minato confirmed that her shrine had been left uncared for. She sighed, though she could not bring herself to care too deeply about people's worship, and then noticed that Minato carried Fujin's power. She asked whether he could ventilate the cave. Startled by the request but too polite to refuse, Minato asked whether she would send him home in return. She told him to stop being difficult and that of course she would, then opened a portal. He moved toward it hopefully, only for her to clarify that the portal was for the wooden boxes, not for him. He asked no further questions and got to work, using his wind powers to send box after box through the portal while the goddess lounged and watched. Across the world, Yamagami and the minions cleared one abandoned portal after another from the sky above the town. Once the immediate surge was under control, Yamagami told the minions quietly that they needed to find Minato. The minions were surprised, they had not realized he was missing, but Yamagami explained that he had heard the phoenix calling for help a short while ago. They prepared to search for him, but a second wave of portals immediately appeared in the sky, this time heading toward Minato's house. Yamagami considered the situation briefly, then Fujin and Ryan appeared and offered their help. Yamagami accepted. The twin gods began closing portals while Yamagami demonstrated that he was feeling better than he had let on, destroying an entire cluster with a single, resonant roar. Back in the cave, Minato finished sending the last of the boxes through and the goddess expressed her satisfaction, though the cave's air quality was still, at its core, the problem. Minato offered a quick solution. He had camphor leaves in his pocket. He used them to purge the stale air from the cave, and the difference was immediate. The goddess was genuinely impressed and asked what those leaves were. He told her about the sacred camphor tree in his garden. She asked whether he always carried them, and he said he did. They had saved his life recently, so he kept them on him. She delightedly asked whether he had more to spare, and he gave them to her willingly. The goddess decided to thank him by transferring one of her powers to him. Before he could respond, she pointed at his forehead and the transfer happened. He asked what the power was. She explained that it was the power of sealing, the ability to lock away things that had no physical form, negative emotions, troublesome impulses, supernatural energy, and more. She told him he could seal such things into any object he chose, not just wooden boxes. She added that he did not have to use it, and that with enough training, he could seal the power itself away if he preferred. She grew drowsy mid-explanation and fell asleep before she could show him the exit. Minato stood there wondering whether it was appropriate to forcibly wake a god when the minions burst through a white portal, exclaiming apologies for taking so long. He stepped through gratefully. The minions told him they had had their hands full. He said he had been stuck with a very ancient, very lazy god, and mentioned, somewhat amazed, that she had given him the ability to seal things. The minions told him calmly that the god he had been with was almost certainly Amaterasu, the sun goddess, one of the most central figures in all of Japanese mythology. Minato's world shifted slightly. He had not pictured her like that at all. They walked home, and Minato asked how the minions had found him. They told him the phoenix's cry had pointed them to the general area, and the wind spirits had guided them the rest of the way. Minato was confused, he had not been aware of any wind spirits. The minions told him to focus. He tried, and this time he could hear the faint, pleased voices of the wind spirits around him, glad he had made it home safely. He could not see them, but he thanked them aloud. When he got home, he found Yamagami in his puppy form, having spent every last drop of his power sealing portals. Yamagami told him grandly that if Minato fed him the desserts he had brought, he would recover his glorious full size in no time. Minato noted with some affection that Yamagami looked incredibly endearing when he was small, practically the perfect size to play alongside the other gods. Yamagami was not charmed by this observation. He reminded Minato, with as much dignity as a very small divine wolf could muster, that he was a respected mountain god and absolutely not a puppy. This is where the video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.